From the outside, it looks like another rap origin story. Grit, hunger, and a young artist rising from the streets. But when you look closer, the story behind Pooh Shiesty isn't just about music. It's about environment, legacy, and a code that was learned long before the first song ever dropped. The name Shiesty didn't come from a marketing meeting or a rap persona brainstormed in a studio. It came from the streets, and it came with weight. Growing up, survival wasn't a lesson taught once. It was reinforced every day. Family ties weren't just about blood. They were about loyalty, reputation, and consequences. In neighborhoods where respect is currency and weakness gets taxed immediately, a last name can either protect you or paint a target on your back. For the Shiesty family, reputation traveled faster than words. People knew who they were, what they stood on, and what lines you didn't cross. That kind of legacy doesn't allow softness. It demands readiness. Pooh Shiesty didn't wake up one day and decide to be hard. He was shaped by what he saw, what he heard, and what he had to become just to make it home every night. Older figures in his life weren't giving motivational speeches. They were giving survival examples. How to move, who to trust, when silence matters more than talking. These lessons don't show up on camera, but they live in the decisions that follow you forever. As he got older, music became an outlet, but it never erased the code he was raised on. Instead, it amplified it. His lyrics didn't sound imagined. They sounded lived in. That's why fans felt them. That's also why critics felt uneasy. When someone raps with that much conviction, people start asking questions about where it comes from. And with Pooh Shiesty, the answer always circled back to family, environment, and a street legacy that never really lets go. The danger of growing up that way isn't just external, it's internal. When you're taught that respect comes from fear and survival comes from dominance, separating identity from environment becomes nearly impossible. Success doesn't automatically free you. Sometimes it just puts a spotlight on the same patterns you've been carrying all along. This story isn't about glorifying violence or labeling anyone by one word. It's about understanding how a legacy can shape a person before they ever get a choice. Because when you meet the Shiesty family, what you're really meeting is a system, one that builds armor early, demands loyalty always, and rarely allows a clean exit. Long before the rap fame, the viral songs, and the industry attention, Pooh Shiesty's world was already defined by rules that didn't come from textbooks or mentors. They came from streets where reputation travels faster than truth and consequences arrive without warning. In that environment, family isn't just support, it's structure. It shapes how you move, how you speak, and how you survive. The Shiesty name carried meaning long before it ever hit a streaming platform, and that meaning followed him into every room he entered. In neighborhoods like the one he grew up in, legacy isn't something you inherit quietly. It's something you live up to, whether you want to or not. Older figures set examples not through lectures, but through presence. Who people feared, who people respected, who people didn't play with. Those observations sink in early. For a young kid watching all of this unfold, the lesson is simple but brutal. Softness invites danger. Hesitation invites loss. You either adapt or you become a victim of the same environment that raised you. The Shiesty family name was tied to survival instincts sharpened over time. That doesn't mean every moment was violent, but it does mean awareness was constant. Knowing when to speak, when to stay quiet, and when to stand firm wasn't optional. It was necessary. Trust was selective. Loyalty was everything. And once you were associated with a certain reputation, the streets didn't allow you to redefine it easily. That kind of pressure shapes identity early, especially when alternatives feel unrealistic or unreachable. Pooh Shiesty didn't grow up dreaming of fame as an escape plan. Music came later, almost organically, as a reflection of what he already knew. When he started recording, his words didn't sound crafted, they sounded familiar. That's because he wasn't inventing a character, he was narrating a world. Fans connected to that authenticity instantly. It felt raw, unfiltered, and unapologetic. But that same authenticity also meant the lines between art and reality were always thin. Family influence in that context isn't about pushing someone toward trouble. It's about normalizing certain responses. If aggression is how respect is earned, then aggression becomes logic. If dominance keeps you safe, then dominance feels justified. Over time, those lessons become instinctive. You don't think about them, you react through them. And when someone raised like that gains visibility, the risks don't disappear, they multiply. As Pooh Shiesty's profile grew, the weight of that legacy didn't lighten. If anything, it became heavier. Fame attracts attention, and attention attracts challenges. People test you to see if the image matches the reality. In the streets, perception matters. Being seen as vulnerable can be dangerous, especially when your name already carries expectations. That pressure can push people to double down on behaviors they should be distancing themselves from, simply to maintain credibility. This is where the story often gets misunderstood. Outsiders want clear villains and heroes. The reality is messier. Growing up in a system that rewards toughness doesn't automatically make someone evil. It makes them conditioned. Conditioned to react. Conditioned to protect. Conditioned to prioritize survival over long-term consequences. That conditioning doesn't shut off just because success arrives. In many cases, success only amplifies the internal conflict. Pooh Shiesty's rise happened fast, and with it came money, influence, and expectations from all sides. The industry wanted hits. The streets wanted consistency. Family wanted loyalty. Balancing those forces is nearly impossible when they pull in opposite directions. The same instincts that help someone survive early on can become liabilities later, especially under constant scrutiny. What often gets lost in discussions about street legacy is how few exits actually exist. Walking away isn't just a decision, it's a risk. It can be seen as betrayal, weakness, or forgetting where you came from. For someone whose identity was built inside that framework, redefining yourself publicly takes more than talent. It takes separation from everything that once kept you safe. This part of the story isn't about accusations or labels. It's about understanding how a foundation shapes choices long before consequences show up. The Shiesty legacy didn't create music, it created a mindset. One that values strength, awareness, and readiness above all else. And once that mindset is ingrained, it doesn't disappear when the lights turn on. It follows you. And that's what makes this story so complex. Not the headlines, not the rumors, but the reality that when someone is raised inside a system built on survival, every choice afterward is influenced by lessons learned too early, and often too deeply, to undo easily. As Pooh Shiesty's world expanded beyond his neighborhood, the rules he was raised on didn't disappear. They collided with new ones. The industry operates on visibility, branding, and perception, but the streets operate on memory. People don't forget who you were before the lights turned on. In fact, success can make the past louder, not quieter. For someone carrying a family legacy rooted in survival, that collision can be dangerous. Music gave Pooh Shiesty a platform, but it also gave people access to him. Old connections resurfaced. New faces appeared with expectations attached. Some wanted proximity, others wanted validation, and some wanted to test whether the reputation matched the reality. In environments shaped by street logic, success doesn't automatically earn respect. It invites challenges. The bigger the name, the bigger the target. What complicates this even more is how loyalty works in these spaces. Loyalty isn't just emotional, it's transactional. It's built on history, shared risk, and mutual protection. Walking away from that doesn't always feel like growth, it feels like abandonment. For someone raised to believe that family and environment are inseparable, distancing yourself can feel like erasing part of your identity. That internal conflict doesn't show up in interviews, but it influences decisions behind closed doors. As his career gained momentum, the pressure to maintain authenticity grew heavier. Fans didn't just want music, they wanted the image they believed in. The same rawness that made his sound compelling also boxed him in. When an artist's appeal is tied to real-life toughness, any sign of change risks being labeled fake. That's the trap. Growth gets mistaken for weakness. Maturity gets mistaken for forgetting where you came from. At the same time, the legal system doesn't care about legacy or environment. It doesn't measure intent through history. It measures actions in isolation. The instincts that once kept someone safe don't translate well in a world governed by documentation, surveillance, and strict accountability. Street logic is immediate. Legal consequences are delayed but permanent. That disconnect catches a lot of people off guard. Another layer often overlooked is how normalization works. When certain behaviors are common around you growing up, they don't register as extreme. They register as routine. Conflict feels expected. Defense feels justified. Lines blur. That doesn't mean someone lacks a moral compass. It means their compass was calibrated differently. Recalibrating it later in life takes time, space, and often separation from the very people who shaped it in the first place. As attention increased, so did scrutiny. Every move was watched, interpreted, and sometimes exaggerated. The margin for error shrank. Situations that might have passed quietly for someone else carried heavier consequences when attached to a known name. Fame magnifies mistakes. It also freezes narratives. Once a label sticks, it's hard to shake, especially when people prefer simplified stories over complex realities. Family influence during this phase became even more complicated. Support and pressure often exist side by side. Encouragement to succeed can coexist with expectations to stay the same. That push and pull creates tension that doesn't have easy answers. Choosing one path can feel like betraying another. And when decisions are made under that kind of emotional weight, clarity is hard to find. What's important to understand here is that none of this unfolds in isolation. These are cumulative forces: upbringing, environment, success, expectation, and consequence, all interacting at once. People on the outside tend to isolate moments and judge them individually. But inside the experience, everything is connected. One decision leads to another. One reaction reinforces a pattern. Over time, those patterns become harder to break. This phase of the story isn't about glorifying or condemning. It's about recognizing how momentum works. When someone rises quickly without time to fully detach from the conditions that shape them, the past doesn't stay behind. It travels with them. And unless there's deliberate effort to create distance, it can influence choices long after the original threat is gone. Pooh Shiesty's journey reflects a larger truth that plays out repeatedly in similar stories. Talent can change your address, but it doesn't automatically change your instincts. Money can remove some dangers, but it can introduce new ones. And legacy, especially one rooted in survival, doesn't loosen its grip easily. This is the uncomfortable middle of the story, where opportunity and conditioning clash, and where every decision carries weight beyond the moment itself. Understanding that tension is key, because without it, the narrative gets flattened into stereotypes that miss the real forces at work. And those forces don't stop moving just because the music does. As Pooh Shiesty continued navigating the delicate balance between the streets and the music industry, the pressures only intensified. By this stage, his reputation was no longer a local fact. It was national. Every interview, every feature, every social media post carried the weight of expectation. Fans and critics alike weren't just listening to his lyrics. They were watching how he moved, how he responded, and whether the persona they'd come to know matched reality. That scrutiny can be suffocating, especially when you've been conditioned to operate under a different set of rules. In the streets, perception mattered, but survival mattered more. In the music industry, perception often outweighs survival entirely. That clash required constant vigilance. One of the most challenging aspects was the constant reminder of past behavior. Actions taken as a teenager or young adult were no longer small. They were amplified and examined under a microscope. Every decision had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate environment, and sometimes those consequences were unpredictable. A momentary lapse, a disagreement, or even a misinterpreted social media post could reignite old narratives. For someone raised in a system where trust was measured by loyalty and presence, navigating this new world of indirect consequences was a steep learning curve. Despite the pressures, there were victories, small almost imperceptible changes began to take hold. Shiesty learned to temper reactions, to think 2 steps ahead, to anticipate how choices would ripple outward. These lessons weren't glamorous. They weren't visible on camera. But in a world that demands instant gratification and constant drama, this quiet self-discipline became one of the most important tools he could possess. It also forced him to confront the hard truth. Some instincts that once kept him alive in the neighborhood no longer applied, and trying to rely on them blindly could be dangerous in a new context. The influence of his family remained significant but complex. On one hand, family represented support, loyalty, and the foundational lessons that had shaped his resilience. On the other, it was a constant reminder of a world that operated under different rules. Advice and guidance were often laced with expectations and judgments based on survival strategies that didn't always translate well to fame. The challenge was figuring out which lessons were still relevant, which, as fame grew, so did the stakes of his actions. Being in the public eye amplified everything, positive or negative. A minor confrontation that might have been dismissed locally became headline news. A personal decision could be misconstrued as a public statement. It wasn't just about navigating the streets anymore. It was about navigating a global audience that didn't fully understand the context. The constant scrutiny forced Shiesty to compartmentalize, a skill that required both discipline and mental resilience. The internal tension between his upbringing and his present reality became increasingly apparent. Survival in his early years had required immediate, instinct-driven responses. Now, survival in the music industry demanded strategy, patience, and long-term thinking. That mental shift didn't happen overnight. It was a constant negotiation between past habits and present demands. Each decision was a test. Could he honor where he came from without letting it control where he was going? Could he maintain authenticity without being reckless? Could he be strong without being self-destructive? Throughout this period, Shiesty's music served as both an outlet and a reflection. The lyrics weren't fabricated tales of street life. They were lived experiences, interpreted through the lens of his evolving reality. They allowed him to process tension, confront challenges, and communicate truths that words alone sometimes couldn't convey. Fans connected deeply because the stories weren't imagined. They were authentic. But that authenticity carried weight. When art mirrors life this closely, the line between performance and reality blurs, and people often expect the persona to behave in the same uncompromising way as the lyrics. Relationships, too, became a battlefield of their own. Alliances that worked in the streets didn't always work in the industry. Partnerships that felt like loyalty sometimes came with hidden agendas. Knowing whom to trust required careful assessment, and mistakes could be costly, professionally and personally. For someone whose foundation was built on trust as a survival mechanism, misjudging intentions could lead to vulnerability, exposure, or conflict. The stakes were higher now, but the lessons from the past were invaluable in navigating them. Perhaps the most important realization during this phase was understanding the enduring power of legacy. Family, environment, and reputation didn't vanish because success arrived. If anything, they became more influential, shaping perception, dictating expectations, and guiding instinct. The challenge wasn't erasing that legacy, it was managing it, adapting it, and using it as a tool rather than a constraint. That required self-awareness and restraint, qualities that didn't come naturally but were essential for survival in a broader arena. By the end of this stage, it became clear that Pooh Shiesty's journey wasn't just about talent or fame. It was about navigating the intersection of history and opportunity, instinct and strategy, legacy and choice. Each decision was a reflection of the life he had lived and the person he wanted to become. And while the path was far from smooth, every lesson learned reinforced one undeniable truth. Survival doesn't end when the environment changes, it evolves. As Pooh Shiesty's career continued to ascend, the weight of his dual world became impossible to ignore. Fame brought opportunity, but it also brought scrutiny, new expectations, and heightened stakes. The streets that had once been his classroom were now watching from a distance, and every misstep, intentional or accidental, could echo far beyond his immediate circle. Survival had always required vigilance, but now that vigilance had to extend into unfamiliar arenas: social media, interviews, industry meetings, and public appearances. One wrong move could jeopardize credibility built over years and make a reputation, carefully crafted over decades of family legacy, vulnerable in ways the neighborhood never could. By this point, Shiesty had learned that his instincts, honed from early life in the streets, weren't always sufficient for navigating this new environment. In the streets, decisions were often immediate, raw, and consequence-driven. But in the industry, consequences could take days, weeks, or months to manifest, and the damage was often public and permanent. He realized that timing, patience, and strategy mattered as much as courage and loyalty. The balance between instinct and calculation became a daily mental exercise, forcing him to adapt quickly or risk failure. Family influence remained both a guide and a challenge. The lessons that shaped him, loyalty, strength, awareness, were indispensable, but they also sometimes collided with the world he now operated in. Decisions that might have been acceptable in the neighborhood could be misunderstood in a professional setting. Friends and family expected him to maintain the authenticity of the Shiesty name, even when doing so could create risk. Reconciling these expectations with new responsibilities required emotional maturity and an ability to anticipate consequences in unfamiliar contexts. As his public profile grew, scrutiny intensified. Every song, post, or public appearance became subject to analysis. Some audiences admired his authenticity, others criticized his choices. Misinterpretations could escalate quickly, and rumors often spread faster than clarification. This environment forced Shiesty to develop thick skin, yet also to become more calculated. Public perception had become just as crucial to survival as the street reputation that had once defined him. Misjudging either could result in serious consequences. Relationships became increasingly complex. Partnerships that worked in the streets didn't always translate into industry success, and alliances came with layers of expectation, loyalty, and sometimes ulterior motives. Trust, which had been a simple survival mechanism in his earlier life, now required careful evaluation. One wrong judgment could have far-reaching effects, both personally and professionally. Navigating these dynamics required a balance of caution, discernment, and strategic thinking that he had never been forced to master before. The pressure to remain authentic was another constant. Fans expected his persona to match his lyrics and past behavior. Every move was compared to the image he had cultivated, an image rooted in resilience, toughness, and street credibility. Deviation from that persona could lead to criticism or accusations of selling out. Yet, growth required some level of change. Shiesty had to learn how to evolve without losing the authenticity that had propelled him to prominence. This tension between evolution and authenticity was a defining challenge of this phase. Internally, he grappled with the contrast between past and present. The survival strategies that once protected him sometimes clashed with industry demands. Decisions once driven by immediate necessity now required foresight, planning, and sometimes restraint. Actions that would have ensured safety in the neighborhood could jeopardize his career. Recognizing which instinct to rely on and which to temper became critical, and mistakes were costly. Each day required a careful mental calculation, weighing legacy against opportunity and instinct against strategy. Despite these pressures, Shiesty began to notice subtle changes in himself. Patience replaced impulsivity in certain situations. Calculation replaced raw reaction. He started understanding that success wasn't just about surviving, but about managing every layer of his environment with skill and foresight. This evolution didn't erase his past, but it allowed him to leverage it as an asset rather than a liability. Music continued to serve as a crucial outlet. It provided a bridge between past and present, allowing him to express experiences and emotions that were difficult to convey otherwise. Lyrics remained grounded in authenticity, reflecting not only his struggles but also his growth. Through music, he maintained a connection to the streets that shaped him while navigating the demands of a broader audience. The balance was delicate, but it was also empowering. By the end of this phase, it became clear that Shiesty's journey was not just about talent or fame. It was about navigating the intersection of legacy, identity, and opportunity. The choices he made were informed by a lifetime of survival instincts, shaped by family influence, and tested in a world far larger than the one he had known. Every decision carried weight, and every action was a reflection of the complex forces that had shaped him. This stage was defined not by dramatic moments, but by persistent, quiet pressure, the kind that forces growth, adaptation, and self-awareness. The stakes were higher than ever, but Shiesty's ability to navigate them was improving. He was learning that survival isn't just about strength. It's about strategy, adaptability, and foresight. And in the world he now inhabited, those lessons were more valuable than any reputation or viral moment could ever be. By the time Pooh Shiesty entered this stage of his journey, the stakes had shifted in ways that demanded a new kind of focus. The fame, the music, and the attention were no longer distractions. They were constants he had to navigate alongside the ever-present weight of his upbringing. Survival in his early years had depended on instinct, speed, and awareness. Now, survival demanded strategy, patience, and foresight. Every interaction, every choice, every public appearance carried consequences that extended beyond the moment, influencing perception, relationships, and his future in the industry. Family influence, while still foundational, had become more complicated. Loyalty and respect were ingrained from an early age, but applying them in a world that required negotiation, compromise, and long-term planning was challenging. Older family members reminded him of his roots, but the lessons that once protected him could also trap him if applied without adaptation. He had to learn to honor the legacy without being constrained by it, balancing instinct with calculated decision-making. That tightrope walk tested his emotional and mental resilience daily. Relationships, both personal and professional, became increasingly complex. Alliances that once felt straightforward now required constant evaluation. Trust wasn't assumed. It was earned, measured, and continuously tested. Business partners, collaborators, and friends all brought expectations, motivations, and agendas that could align or conflict with his goals. Misjudgments had higher consequences than ever, and Shiesty learned to assess situations critically, using lessons from the past to navigate present challenges. Experience and vigilance became his most valuable tools. Public scrutiny added another layer of pressure. Every song, interview, and social media post was dissected. Fans expected authenticity, while critics scrutinized decisions and behavior. Any misstep could feed narratives that amplified risks. The balance between personal truth and public perception became essential. Shiesty's challenge was to remain genuine without allowing scrutiny to dictate his identity or his actions. That tightrope required discipline and self-awareness, skills he honed through years of navigating streets and industry pressures simultaneously. Emotionally, this phase was the most demanding. The conflicts between past and present, loyalty and strategy, instinct and patience created internal tension that required constant management. Shiesty had to process grief, anger, and frustration without allowing them to derail his trajectory. He began practicing restraint, not as weakness, but as a strategic choice, understanding that the right move in a moment could determine his long-term survival and growth. Emotional intelligence became a critical component of his evolution. Music continued to serve as a bridge between the worlds he inhabited. It allowed him to process his experiences, reflect on lessons learned, and communicate truths that words alone often failed to capture. His lyrics remained authentic, grounded in the realities of his upbringing while also acknowledging growth. Fans connected with the duality, raw experience paired with deliberate strategy. It was proof that evolution doesn't erase authenticity. It can enhance it when approached thoughtfully. Through this process, Shiesty began to internalize the value of foresight. In the streets, immediate action determined survival. In his current reality, the long-term consequences mattered more. Decisions had to be measured, outcomes anticipated, and reactions calculated. This mindset didn't eliminate risk, but it allowed him to navigate challenges with greater confidence and control. The balance between caution and courage became central to his identity, as both an artist and a man shaped by his environment. By the end of this stage, the transformation was evident, even if subtle. Shiesty's growth wasn't marked by headlines or viral moments, but by sustained awareness and deliberate action. He wasn't the same person who had walked into the industry years ago. He wasn't defined solely by the streets that raised him, nor by the fame that now surrounded him. He had become someone capable of integrating lessons from both worlds, using legacy as guidance rather than limitation. This stage emphasized that true evolution is rarely dramatic. It's a quiet accumulation of decisions, reflections, and choices that collectively shape identity and destiny. For Shiesty, survival no longer relied solely on instinct or intimidation. It required strategy, emotional intelligence, and the ability to balance multiple realities simultaneously. He had learned that legacy shapes you, opportunity tests you, and growth is the reward for navigating both with skill and awareness. Ultimately, this phase of his journey revealed a deeper truth. Authenticity and evolution can coexist even under extreme scrutiny. Survival isn't just about protecting yourself from external threats. It's about mastering your internal world, adapting to new challenges, and making choices that honor both past lessons and future goals. For Pooh Shiesty, the streets gave him strength, the industry gave him visibility, and his own decisions would determine how successfully he bridged the two. Pooh Shiesty's story isn't just about music or fame. It's about the powerful influence of environment, family, and legacy on a young life. From the streets that shaped him to the spotlight that tested him, every choice he made carried weight, and every lesson learned came with consequences. His journey shows how survival isn't just instinct. It's strategy, awareness, and the ability to adapt while staying true to yourself. This is a story about growth under pressure, authenticity in the face of scrutiny, and the delicate balance between honoring your past and shaping your future. Now we want to hear from you. What do you think about how Shiesty navigated these challenges? Can someone truly evolve while carrying a legacy like his? Comment your thoughts below. Share this video with others who need to see it. And make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories that go beyond the headlines and explore the real forces shaping your favorite artists' lives.